Morning, church. Today's reading will be from Psalms 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth give way, the mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Through its waters roar and foam. The mountains quake with their surging. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy place where the Most High dwells. God is within her. She will not fall. God will help her at break of day. Nations are in uproar. Kingdoms fall. He lifts his voice. The earth melts. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come and see what the Lord has done, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes war cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. He says, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord Almighty is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress."
So as a lefty, I've spent 50 years of my life basically denying that my right hand exists, but I'm going to have to learn how to use it now. So Friday night I discovered that hockey is a much more fun game when you play within the boundaries of the walls rather than playing into the wall. So I've got a few weeks where I'll be one-handed here. I remember a few years ago I had a chance to go out on a fishing boat out in the Gulf. And I've only done that a few times in my life, being on that small a boat on the sea. Quickly realized why I'm a great landlubber, because I was not too far out there before I was mostly thinking about regretting what I had for breakfast. And there's this process then that you're like thinking about, how am I going to survive? And of course the key is you sometimes don't, but then really what you try to do until you're convinced of that is you're just looking at the skyline. Like looking at as far out as you can, just trying to ignore the waves and ignore the rocking. And as you look at the skyline, it gives you a chance to ground yourself, to try to really understand where you're at while the storm is moving about you. I think, that's kind of life. It can kind of leave us feeling seasick sometimes. And that sense of seasickness can be global. You can get yourself caught up in just thinking about what's going on in the world, whether it's the wars and the threat of wars, as Scripture will talk about, whether it's the state of the nation, if you're the kind that has the experience of watching your stock market portfolio, then you probably have been a little seasick the last month or two. If you're interested in things like tariffs and politics, you can get caught up in the 24-hour news cycle and find yourself just rattled all the time, because that's how they sell the advertising space, is to keep you rattled and thus glued to their television or glued to their station. It can be personal. The tragedies you encounter, the illnesses you have, the stress you experience, all can kind of leave you in a place of feeling seasick. And the answer is, how do you then look at the skyline to just remember who you are and where you're at, or reorient yourself? Well, I think Easter and the aftermath of Easter is a chance for us essentially to find our sea legs, to kind of reorient ourselves, to remind ourselves who we are. The testimony that I enjoyed sharing with so many of you last week, He is risen indeed, is a testimony of a relentless joy that exists despite the circumstances of life. To realize that in the pronouncing of Jesus' resurrection, He is saying something about the nature of sin and death and its passing nature and all of the sources of hardship and suffering that we encounter. It should leave us in a place of confidence, and I think that's a great space to join Psalm 46. Psalm 46 is a beautiful psalm of confidence in God's provision. It celebrates the sense of who we are, because of what God has done and is doing in our lives, and allows us just to orient ourselves, find our sea legs around the reality of God's provision. And I think Psalm 46 is a great celebration to read and to reflect on and to partake in light of Easter as we move away from Easter Sunday. The confidence that we can have because of Christ's resurrection. It's a space for us to reflect on what does that resurrection mean for us. So if you don't have your Bibles open to Psalm 46, I encourage you to do so. Psalm 46 is not long, but it really divides up into 3 very clean sections. It's one of those that has the musical markers. It's the best we can know that the word Selah appears twice, or every few verses in the psalm. It shows up 3 times, and that really creates the 3 markers as you move through the psalm. The first is just 3 verses long before you get to that moment. And it really, I think this first 3 verses helps us then start thinking about what does the resurrection mean for us. First 3 verses will tell you this, is that it means that you have a refuge against life's storms. God is our refuge. That's the opening words of the psalm. And God is our refuge in this space regardless of our circumstances. The opening is itself an invitation into wisdom, because the opening is telling you to look to God first in your life as you're navigating whatever storms are rocking the boat that you're on. The word refuge takes us back. The word refuge shows up in a third of the Psalms of Book 1, shows up in a fourth of the Psalms of Book 2. The idea of God as refuge is just one of the key anchor ideas that the Psalms have for us. What do you want to know about God? What is important to really know about God? It is this, that God is our refuge. And that also tells you, as it opens with the idea that God is our refuge, it's telling you that this is a psalm of the people of God, because not everybody takes their refuge in God. That's one of the movements of the psalm. We'll get to that later. The calling, the charge of God, of verse 1, is to take refuge in God and to keep doing so, to keep looking to Him. It says God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. That's very present help it's a hard word to translate, but you could also translate it exceedingly. He's exceedingly helpful. The focus in that word is less on the constancy of His help, though that's certainly true. It is on the extent of His provision. He's really helpful. He's really, really helpful. He's the actual answer, the full answer you really need in those circumstances. What do you really need? You need God to be your refuge and your strength, to be that help in that space. And that refuge is enough even when the world is collapsing. One of the movements of the psalm is that it really moves, it's a movement from the greater to the lesser. What it starts with here in these first few verses is a really, really big problem, and then actually moves down to a lesser problem. So we get oriented. You kind of get like you're overtraining. You're getting yourself oriented and say, well, God is our refuge, even if, verses 2 and 3, the world is completely collapsing around me. Even if the universe itself collapses in, God is still my refuge and strength. We will not fear though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though its mountains tremble at its swelling. The mountains here, one of the images in the ancient Near East, it's almost like the mountains are often described what we might see as the tent pole of the universe. The mountains are the thing that are always there. They prop it up. They're propping up the world. Now, I had a chance to head out to Colorado a few times over the last year, but one of the mountains I got to be at was the same mountain that I'd visited with my parents, with my mom in like the 90s. I have a picture in my office of us there, and I think it's from like 98, so it's like 1,000 years ago. But the mountain is the same. Like, it hadn't really changed. Like, there's the constancy. Like, we've changed a lot. It's a really different world that many years later. But the mountains are still there. And you come back and to see that same view decades and decades later, say, wow, there's some reminder of these mountains They're this constant thing in the universe as it changes around. And that's how they understood the mountains. The sands may change. You can have the sands if you're in a desert, and sands will blow, and all of a sudden what's a hill here today and it's gone tomorrow because the sands have blown it around, the winds have blown it, but not the mountains. Though the mountains, and the translation I have, that though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, it's fine as a translation, but it's a real vivid image. It misses the vividness. And in fact, one of the ways you could translate it, it'll be relevant here in a little bit, is that it totters. The mountains will totter into the sea. And that's going to come relevant here when we get to the second section. But we're not going to fear, even if the mountains are collapsing, and then the waters are roaring and foaming. That's not pleasant imagery. That's vivid. That's terrifying imagery. The roaring and the foaming are used throughout the Psalms of the arrogance of the wicked. The wicked will roar in Psalm 10 and Psalm 31. But here, it's what it's describing in these first 3 verses is the greatest dangers possible, and the peace that he knows in the midst of the greatest dangers that he can possibly imagine, that God is his refuge. And so when you get the imagery, when you embrace the imagery of those first 3 verses, what he's saying feels impossible. I mean, it feels impossible because the world is collapsing, and there would be a lot of anxiety that you would feel, a lot of worry, a lot of trouble. But that's the reality of a sovereign God. God cares for his people. God cares for his creation, and nothing is beyond him. There is no power that you can encounter to say, God would say, well, I wasn't prepared for that. I don't have an answer to that one. He's ready. He is our refuge. He is our strength. We have a refuge against life's storms. And you go to the second piece. It means, in the verses 4 through 7, it means that God's presence is a constant source of strength. It's a very different tone. The world is collapsing in the first 3 verses. You've got think about the old apocalyptic movies. If you're going to have a tornado, or you're going to have a storm, or you're having whatever. The world is ending. Now you got verse 4. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. So you get to this moment, and you see that the church's safety comes from the presence of God. One writer described this psalm as like a cosmological sandwich, because at the beginning you have all of these storms that are surrounding, and then you'll get to the section 3, we'll get to in a minute, and you've got all these threats on every side. So there's the storms on either side, there's all the raging, and in the middle you have the church living in refuge, the people of God living in this place. And where are they living? The focus in verse 4 is on the city of God. That's significant. This is the first time in the book in the Psalms that you see a reference to the city of God. And in their context, you're thinking of Zion or Jerusalem. You're thinking of this place that God has called. This is the place where I'll be. This is the place eventually where they'll build the temple, that the tabernacle will be permanent. And this is the place where God will dwell. And there's an irony here. If you see the city of God and you think about it, Jerusalem, well, Jerusalem is a lot of things. But here it describes that there's this river who's moving through Jerusalem. And that's a really relevant image to the ancient Near East. You think if you're building a city in the ancient world, where are you going to build a city? Well, it'd be great to build a city near water, because water protects. Water provides life. Well, one, water gives a buffer. You have protection. You can only attack from one side. It also gives life. You have a water source. That's pretty important. So they would build near a river. But you could also build in the mountains. The mountains will give you lots of protection. But then you got no water. So what are you going to do? Well, Jerusalem is not a river city. It's a mountain city. They got a stream. They don't have a river. So when they're describing this river that's running through Jerusalem, well, that's not true. There is no river in Jerusalem. And I think that's the irony, that they're should be scratching their head as they read that. It's like, wait a second, there's no river around here. But there's a water. It's imagining Jerusalem as if Jerusalem exists by this water, like by this wide river that provides this constant supply. And that actually speaks to the prophecies that surround Zion. You can look at places like Ezekiel 47, Joel 3, Zechariah 14, and you have these images of this promise that Jerusalem will be a source, that there will be a river that will flow out of Jerusalem. It will provide constant stream of water, constant life from Zion, from the city of God. And in a sense, that's saying Jerusalem will become like in Eden. In the Garden of Eden, there's this river that will flow out. It flows out, essentially feeding the world, providing water, life. Well, that source is because God is there. That's actually all those prophecies are fulfilled in Revelation 22. The way they're fulfilled is that God is the source. And God is the river. He is the water of life. He's the river of life that will feed His people, this constant source of life, constant water. Same thing that Jesus says of Himself, I am the water of life. Like it's telling the woman at the well, like, I'll give you a source of water. You'll never be thirsty again. She's like, yeah, give me some of that water. The water, that river is me. I'm the source. He is the fulfillment of what they're imagining here in the Old Testament. What they're prophesying and speaking of is that the city of God will be this constant source of water streaming life because God is there. Because it is a holy habitation of the Most High, in verse 4. And when it says holy habitation in the original, they actually, it's plural. It's the habitations. It's the tabernacles, the tents. And it's plural, not because there's more than one of them. It's in Hebrew it would be an intensive plural, because it's really, really important. It's the idea is that it's God's presence is there. God's presence, His tabernacle. It's the place where He takes up residence. Wherever God is, there is this river of life, this source of life for people. And so the wars are raging around them, the world is collapsing, the people are in the city of God, dwelling in His midst, and they have Him as His source. Verse 5, God is in the midst of her, she shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. For God's people, no matter how much the storms might rage at night, there is always the dawn. And of course I hear that. My first place that I go is Tolkien. I'm thinking of the Battle of Helm's Deep and the raging that these have fighting orcs, and they can barely survive. But Gandalf told them, look for me on the rise of the third day, and I'm going to be there. There's the dawn. And as the dawn comes, there he is, this white rider ready to rescue the people. Well, Tolkien's looking at these kind of verses when he's writing that. He's imagining that. He's seeing the kind of Christ-like figure there in that moment, because he's there to rescue. He's there to bring life. There is a dawn. And of course, that's what we just celebrated a week ago. That's Resurrection Sunday. At the dawn, there is new life. When morning dawns for God's people, there is a tomorrow. There's a future. The nations rage. The kingdoms totter. There's that's word. That's why I wanted you to see that word really can be translated as tottering. The mountains totter, and the nations rage, but God's presence is stronger. That's the second idea here, is that God's presence is stronger than the nations. When you see that phrase in verse 6 of the nations rage, it takes you back to Psalm 2. The nations rage and the people plot in vain. Because while the nations can do their thing and the politics and politicians can have all their saying, here's how we're going to control, here's how we're going to take over, here's all the things we're going to accomplish, God is sovereign over all nations and all leaders and all people at all times. He says, no, this is what we'll accomplish. This is what will happen. God is ruling over them. And these nations that rage, these kingdoms, ultimately they're going to totter. Zion will not totter because God is present there. God's presence is stronger than these nations. God is doing something. The voice of God is enough to destroy the raging of the nations. Verse 6, he utters his voice and the earth melts. As I read that verse, I was trying to think of just different powerful voices throughout history. One of the most interesting in the history of the church is a guy named George Whitefield. George Whitefield is the great American revivalist, well, British revivalist, came to America. He's preaching throughout. He had this amazing presence that you could just hear him from crazy distances. They had this voice that just filled whatever space he was in. He was one guy that was really fascinated by him was Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin was not a believer, but he said once, well, why are you here, Ben? You're not a believer. He's like, no, but he is. He was really fascinated with Whitefield, to the point that he actually ran a little scientific experiment. He was curious to see how loud he was, how far could you hear him. And so he started walking backwards when he was at one of his talks. And Whitefield would give these huge things. They estimate crowds would be as many as 80,000 people would come to hear him speak. And think about it, no microphones, no PA systems. He just had this booming voice. He estimated that you could hear him for about 23,000 square meters. The guy had a presence. There was a modern study on Whitefield's voice that estimated that he had a voice to do that would be about 90 decibels. You're considered a loud talker if you're talking at 74. I mean, he was just super loud voice. And there are people that have been recorded talking that loud. But he just could fill this space. And they were like, yeah. What they were trying to do is to figure out, could he actually have talked to those larger crowds? Because he would regularly have 25, 30,000 people, and say the largest that they've estimated was there was one that was 80,000 listening to him. Like, yeah, he had that kind of voice. He would speak, and everybody would stop to hear him and listen. And, well, that's not even anything like God's voice here. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And that's the refrain, a refrain we're going to hear twice. Hear it again at the end. The Lord of hosts, he is the supreme commander. He is the Yahweh of armies. He is the God of Jacob, which is a reminder of his past faithfulness. He has been our fortress. He continues to be our fortress. He will be our fortress. God's presence is stronger than the raging of the nations. And so we anchor our hope in his presence. The resurrection is a reminder that we have both the gift of his Spirit now, we have the promise of his eternal presence, and he takes up his dwelling in Jesus, both in and among us. What was true then is even more true now in light of the resurrection of Jesus. Which then leads us to the third section, starting in verse 8. It means also that all should respond in faith to the King. Verse 8 begins the first of two imperatives that drive the section. The first section is to come. And I think that's the first piece, our first response to the work of God. How do you respond to what he's doing? Our first response is to come in faith. He invites people to come and behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. It's an invitation to respond. It's an invitation to see his work. Behold has this image of taking a good look. It's not just some passing glance. You're really pausing, dwelling, thinking about maybe there at an art museum, somebody who's going to sit there and just stare at a painting for an hour, just to really study. Do that. Take a look at the work of the Lord. Really gaze. Consider it. But then it's to think about what is he thinking about that God is doing. I think it's interesting. He's brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars cease to end the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. God is bringing judgment here on those raging nations. Well, I thought the middle section was all about peace, right? But here it's all about judgment. He's making war against war. He's making the wars cease. He's Because war is this self-destructive thing that just ruins everybody in its midst. He's offering something different. He's putting an end to war. Well, there's peace and there's judgment, and they're both true. One writer says, although the outcome is peace, the process is judgment. Even as you think about this from the lens of the resurrection of Jesus, Easter and the resurrection message is both a message of hope and a message of judgment. In fact, it is a message of hope through judgment. God will judge the wicked. He will judge sin. He's putting sin and death to death. He's destroying it. He will put an end to it. There is a judgment for those who will reject his offer of salvation. And that's a piece of the story. The piece of the story that you can't run away from. And here, it's actually a good thing, because the stuff that he's putting it into is really quite terrible. You don't want it. But he has brought his desolations on the earth in order to end the desolations on the earth, to bring something better. Our first response is to come, to consider, and part of the consideration is to consider the reality of judgment. That there is only one path to life, and that is through Jesus himself. So consider it. Turn away from all other false pursuits and follow him. And then the second response in verse 10 is to be still. I think that's a text sometimes we can misunderstand. What does he say? Be still and know that I'm God. I will be exalted among the nations. I'll be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Our second response to God's work is to be still and cease the raging. When we hear, be still and know that I am God, a lot of times we would hear that verse and it feels like a kind of cozy devotional kind of thing. You know, like you're going to have that verse. If you go look at all the clip art on that, I can't remember what I saw, but it'll be like 1,000 images of like clouds and grassy fields and furry animals. Like that's the image of be still and know that I'm God. That's not what this image means. The be still isn't a comforting calm. It is the voice of Jesus in the midst of a storm where the disciples think that they're getting ready to die on the boat with him because this storm is so horrendous that they really think this is the end. And Jesus rises up and says, be still, which isn't a cozy word. It's something more like, shut up. And then the storm stops. He's looking at all the raging, and he's telling it to stop. Stop the raging against God. It's all of that fighting and going on, and it's that, this is what I imagine Jonathan can do at the midst of a football practice, where everyone's buzzing about and all the stuff's going on, and then Jonathan's voice can say, stop, and everyone can stop. He's got a George Whitfield kind of voice. So it's not a gentle voice. It is a command to the storms of the earth to stop raging against God. That's the command to be still. Come and be still, verse 8 and verse 10, isn't a command to the church. It is the church, it's God's people here speaking out to the raging nations. Get away from all this stuff that's destroying yourself. You're killing yourself. Be still and come before him. Command to stop raging against God, because he will be exalted among the nations. His name will be lifted up. God's glory will be seen in all the earth, and he'll be seen in the judgment of the nations, and he's going to be seen among those nations for people say, I've had enough, and I'm repenting of my allegiance to those nations, and I'm turning my allegiance to God and God alone. I'm giving my allegiance to him. His glory will be seen and exalted in all the earth. And that's the arc of the New Testament. The resurrection doesn't produce a cozy message. The resurrection leads us to the exaltation of Jesus, his ascension, as he ascends into the clouds from the perspective of Revelation, is an ascension into his throne, where he is stepping into the throne room and getting his place of honor at the right hand of God, ruling over all things. It is the rule of Jesus that is putting an end to sin and death and all chaos. His name will be exalted among the nations. His name will be exalted in the earth. And our comfort is that refrain. The Lord of hosts, the God of armies, is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. So there is this double-edged application, that there is an invitation to the rebel, to the raging nations and the people who live among them, to surrender to Jesus Christ as Lord. And it is an application to the believing church to remain strong in faith. And that's my invitation to you. My encouragement to you is find your sea legs by trusting in the risen Jesus. Whichever side of that application applies to you. If you're a believer, then orient yourself and remind yourself in the midst of whatever storms you might be caught up in, whether it's personal, as small as a little pain in my arm, or is it as big enough as you're caught up in the raging of the nations and you're worried about the wars and you're worried about everything around you. Whatever's going on, look at something like Matthew 16, and though all hell will rage against the church, Christ will build her, and she will not fall. Take your comfort in being part of his people, and know that he is your refuge and strength. And that is true of the church, Matthew 16. It is also true of the individuals in the church. The Jesus Christ that is revealed to us in Psalm 46 is sufficient for all trials. Whatever trials you're facing, whatever trials you will face, he is sufficient. And you'll find your sea legs as you look to him to orient yourself in the midst of that. And if those around you, those you're praying for, those you're burdened by, and it may be you yourself, if you're part of those raging nations, bend the knee. Reject the allegiance of these kingdoms that lead you away and lead you into the land of sin and death. Turn to him in the midst of the storms. Whoever you are, bring him your storms. Take refuge in him and call on others to do the same. Find your sea legs by trusting in the risen Jesus. Let's pray. God, I pray for those of us who are in the midst of storms, those who are feeling the weight, whatever those storms are, if they're deeply personal, if they're big storms of the nations. God, I pray that you will help us to find our refuge and strength in you. I pray for those here who have not submitted to follow you, those that we know of who've not submitted. God, I pray that the message of refuge and strength that we see in Psalm 46 and we see fulfilled in the resurrection of Jesus will shape and transform our hearts and those that we love and care for, that you will lift their hearts to you to be the refuge and strength for them in the midst of the storms. In Jesus' name, amen. If we can help in any way, please come while we stand and sing. The splendor of